Welcome into the Backroads Build podcast. I'm Ben, and this is part 2 of our conversation with Peter Smith from Ontario Sasquatch. If you haven't seen part 1, you can check out, I'll put the link in the description below. And this time he brought along not just himself, but also his partner, Christine, who she talks about her personal experience with Sasquatch that made her a believer and made her take this journey in life. And she's also from the West Coast, and this is what was very interesting was here it's a little bit taboo, right? In Ontario, don't really talk about Sasquatch. Out in the West Coast, they are very, very open about it. So she talks about the different dynamics as well between not just here, but different places across Ontario. There's a lot of really good stuff. If you like part 1, you're going to get a lot of the same here in part 2. And Peter also does take us a little bit behind the curtain, a little bit, and he talks about when he thinks the findings that him and his people have found when they will be ready to reveal some things to the public. Founded in 1968, Voyager Aviation is a proud member of our community, providing worldwide aviation services from our headquarters right here in North Bay. If you're looking for a challenge, change, or want to expand your current career in aviation, Voyager is hiring for a wide range of technical and non-technical roles, including pilots, aircraft maintenance personnel, corporate administration, machinists, supply chain professionals, and more. Be part of a workforce that is over 400 strong, supporting humanitarian, government, defense, and civil aviation operations around the world. For a career in aviation and beyond, learn more about open positions and career paths at voyav.com. Well, we had Peter from Ontario Sasquatch with us last week. He graciously came back for a part 2 and brought along his partner, Christine. Welcome, Peter, back to the show.
Thank you.
And welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
And I know, Bill, you're super eager to get started, so I'm going to throw over to you to get us going.
It's part 2 of the Backroads Build podcast, and yeah, it's a real pleasure to have Christine and Peter in the studio with us because last week we talked a lot about Sasquatch, and I know the listeners and viewers probably know about Sasquatch, but here we have firsthand information, and that's a good segue over to Christine because she had a real encounter with a Sasquatch some years back, and that's a great way to start off this episode. Christine, tell us all about it.
Well, I remember that the month had to be August, and we figured out I was maybe about 9 years old, and I was born and raised in South Porcupine. The significance of the month of August was my mother raised me alone, so I didn't go to camp, but most of my friends left for camp, and I was always comfortable running around the bush. So at that time, the raspberries were quite prevalent. So I could easily walk up to an area that's called Legion Drive. And past Legion Drive, when they made these homes for the veterans, they pushed all the bush back. So there was these berms, back there, which made it very easy for the raspberries to grow. So I asked my mother if I could go and collect some raspberries, and she'd make me like a little turnover or whatever. So I went, and while I was there, I was standing underneath this berm, reaching up, because I don't like to be picked by raspberries, and I was reaching up, and as I was reaching up into these raspberries, right in front of my face, and I mean in front of my face, these 2 large hands came out of the raspberry bush, and I was staring at this face. It had an almost benevolent look on its face. I knew I wasn't seeing a bear. I was used to seeing prospectors around our town, but it was shocking. And I say shocking, I just went almost like, what is this? And I wasn't frightened, which was the strangest thing. But the next thing I remember was I was running home and I was looking at my feet and I was saying, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. So when I got home, I didn't know how to describe this to my mother, and I didn't want her to prevent me from going back to the bush because that was my favorite place, and I was never afraid. So I stayed quiet. I never told anybody about this incident until years later. My son out in Vancouver Island told me about an incident that happened near his home on a place called Forbidden Plateau. And in that place, a man had an incident where he was crossing this small bridge. He bumped into something, and that something grabbed his boat and punched a hole in the side of his boat. So my son said, oh my gosh, we have Sasquatch where I am. And I said, well, I've seen one when I was a child. And he said, why you never told us? And I said, where I was raised, it wasn't that I was going to be told I was lying or whatever. I just had no one to tell it to. And now I find that I probably had one of the closest encounters that's probably happened to anyone, and I've never felt that I wasn't connected some way with this Sasquatch. And let's face it, I was all on my own. I could have disappeared. And I just still can see this face looking at me kind of quizzical and not threatening.
That's quite a story. I mean, that's funny, this coming out sort of thing. A few weeks ago, we had NorthBay police chief who also had a Sasquatch encounter, and it took him years. In fact, it was on the Backroads Bill podcast that he told the entire story, but for years and years, he would not tell anyone. Oh, just, the stigma for him in perhaps disbelief and those kinds of things. So, and I think that's often the case of people that they don't want to tell the story of something that really happened to them because of that whole notion of, oh, you're just making it up kind of thing. But so that's it. What else do you remember about that encounter? And of course, that lasting encounter, you end up meeting Peter and and the whole that. Tell us about that transition to even more Sasquatch.
Well, I'll tell you I could see, I do a little bit of artwork, and I have done a picture of what I saw, including the hands. I did see kind of a large shoulders, and everything that people describe about a Sasquatch, the hairy shoulders. The face, honestly, I can tell you, it does not look ape-like. It has more of a human look. And the thing about this encounter was I always have had this feeling that I'm connected. Somehow this encounter has left me connected to Sasquatch. Now, I went out west because my son brought us on an expedition out there with the BRFO. And my husband came along very skeptical. He was a city police officer. But after we went on this BRFO expedition, he said he could come back and convince a jury of 12 people that they exist. Because we were out there with university professors and real intense investigators with lots of knowledge. But I was going out there because I wanted to follow through on this. And when I was going out there, one of the investigators out there, Dave Hill, said to me, well, why do you come all the way out west that you have them in Ontario? And I said, well, I don't know of any group. And he said, no, we'll put you in touch. And that's how I met Peter. Of course, this was after my husband had passed away, and it just fell into place. And I think it's been, it makes us having a good relationship.
Yeah. Well, then, the paths cross or the dots are connected. And I think, it's important to tell that part of the story as well, because something that happened early on in life, all of a sudden then it reappears sort of, and of course, part of both of your relationship, a common denominator, so to speak. But Peter, that kind of leads us to also one of the most, I think, as you say, one of the best photographs of Sasquatch. And tell us about this incident that probably was, I think, in the Temagami area. Tell us a bit about that.
I joked that Christine and I met online, but it's all to do with Sasquatch.
I mean, that's perfect. Like, what else can be said about that?
Yeah.
We didn't go to the show. We didn't hold hands. We have Sasquatch in common.
I had a report. I'm not going to quote dates because I forget them now, but it was back around 2012 or something like that. Somebody sent me a report from his GoPro when he was driving home from Algonquin Park, and he had a really good video. He didn't know till he got home. His wife had said halfway along, "Oh, what's that?" And when he got home, he played it back to the point where she said that, and sure enough, in the ditch beside the road was a stream, and it said there was a big Sasquatch stood beside it. So we talked about that report, and then he said, "Did you see the photos that are on Google Earth?" And I said, "No." And so he pointed me to these incredible pictures, very sharp. No, they weren't fuzzy like they usually are. They were very good pictures. So they were posted by Panoramio, and I tracked down the person that had posted, and it was, I can't mention his name, but they're an elderly couple, and they had taken these pictures at their cabin on Duncanson Lake up in Temagami area. So I contacted him, we exchanged several emails, and they had gone into the OPP station, and I have the time and the date, and they reported it to the OPP, who kind of laughed at them, but he had to follow up, so he called the MNR, and they went back to their cabin, which is, you have to go in through Elk Lake and drive south to Duncanson Lake. So the following day, an MNR officer arrives there, and he's got a biologist with him and an assistant. And we know their names. They were driving a white Escalade, so I knew right away that he must be a pretty senior guy to have a white Escalade with a Fish and Game logo on the side. So I asked the witness, "Did you get the license plate number?" "No." "Did you get their business cards?" "No." "What's their names?" So he told me their names. They're, all he knew was their first names of the biologist and the assistant. So I tracked them down to... I'm not going to say too much more because we're in dispute with them right now. I traced them to the MNR office in Northern Ontario, let's put it that way. And I named the biologist, I named the assistant, and we had total denial. I contacted the OPP in Temagami and gave them the time and the date of the report. Now, this is just before computers got popular, so I knew it was going to be a hard copy, it's not going to be in their computer. Total denial. So I find out later that the person had given us the report for Algonquin Park, the one who led me to the pictures, he's been contacted by MNR, and they weren't too happy that he had this information online. So they were invited to a meeting where MNR officers were being briefed on these encounters. And after the meeting, they had a chat with them, and they said, we would like the original copy of the video. Of course, he refused, and we've kept all the evidence. They're not happy that we have this information, and they're not happy at all that we're sharing it. But it's public information, so we keep sharing it. Now, that's an ongoing dispute with us now. It's in kind of a stalemate.
Why do you think they're unhappy? I don't know how much you can say, obviously, but do you think it's because they don't want people on that kind of land looking for things, or I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on it.
David Pilates did the books, the Missing 411 books. There's a lot of people go missing in provincial parks. If it was public knowledge with proof through video and photos that this creature exists, there's going to be a lot of provincial parks that are losing customers. So I think they're worried about panic. They're also worried about the Northern Ontario in particular, forestry and mining. If this is proven that there's an unknown species here, there's going to be some environmental assessments before anything starts, any new forestry, any new mining. So there's a big impact.
Now, because you guys are obviously you know a lot more about Sasquatches than I do, do they have a tendency to be violent? Because a lot of the stories that I've seen, they're like yours, Christine, it's not a violent story. Is that something that you've noticed in your years of doing it?
We have quite a lot of encounters because we know what time of the day to go into the bush looking for them. We sit around a campfire and we bring them in. So we have a lot of encounters. We have no fear of them at all. The natives do have traditions and stories of Junosqua, that's their word for it. It's darker than the brownish Sasquatch that we have. It's much bigger by about a foot or so. And there are stories that they used to raid the native villages and they would carry off children and the elderly and the sick. Then there are other stories where the native children used to play with the young Sasquatch. So it looks like the Junosqua are the ones to be avoided and Sasquatch is okay. Now, we don't have any Junosqua around here, but there are some further north that we're aware of.
Do you have an estimate on population for Sasquatch? Like how many you would estimate in Ontario or in general?
Many more than we think.
Yeah.
Because all our reports that's on our map are along the highways, and people say, how come they're always along the highways? I say, well, it's people that are reporting them. It's not the Sasquatch telling you where they are. So if you go into remote areas, there's probably a lot more of them.
Yeah, and now, so when you go through a report, you have obviously an investigator that goes out, and that's a role you've done before. How, as an investigator, like what do investigators do, and how do you determine something that this story is true or that it's not? Like
that was going to be my question, Ben.
Was it? Okay.
So we're thinking along the same lines,
Yeah.
even though it's not so scripted. But yeah, that's what it was going to lead to on Ontario Sasquatch, that encouraged the listeners and viewers to go, and that's exactly it. Yeah. What about how do you look at these reports? We
try to discredit the report. That's the first thing we do, because if you can't discredit it, then it gives it more credibility. We watch the witness, and you get that feel whether it's kind of a credible report or not. There are some that are obvious hoaxes, and we've dismissed those. When they show us footprints and stuff, that's pretty convincing. It's really a judgment call, because how do you know if it's a hoax or not? You don't.
One of the things that I watch these videos, and people will place a foot or whatever, and I say, oh God, why didn't they put something down beside the foot? I don't care if it's a cigarette or nobody carries rulers, and follow the track. Show me more than one or two, because then it validates that yes, something was walking there. It's hard if there's a step in mud and then the next step isn't so much in mud. But if you could just put something down beside the print, and then we can estimate, and we know by parts of a Sasquatch foot, there's telling tales about it, the width of the toes and the shape of the toes and whatever. But that would be the one thing I would tell people. If you see something, put something down beside it.
Is there anything anatomy-wise? Because obviously you have the footprints and stuff, but have you guys or somebody out there figured out the anatomy of a Sasquatch, or any, I guess, biological information like you would other animals and creatures?
I had when I was out with the BRFO, the group was talking about this prints that they had found, and they were trying to determine whether it was a Sasquatch. And they said, well, it was walking funny. There was more of a instead of straight, a footprints are one in front of the other, okay, always in a straight line. And this one had like a foot that was kind of going to the side a little bit. And they said, well, we can't figure out what this was. Why is there a foot that's, the balance would have been off? And I said, well, I hate to tell you guys, but have you ever seen a woman that's pregnant walk? And all of a sudden the light went on. They said, oh, of course. Like if there's a female that's pregnant, she's not going to walk particularly the same as, not pregnant.
So, Peter, what other evidence, again, for listeners and viewers, what other kind of evidence that are reported, and what should people do when they think they've seen or had a Sasquatch encounter?
Structures are always confusing. We see these wooden structures, like a teepee or something in the bush. First thing we see is how close are our kids, because kids make things in the bush. So, but if this is in a remote area and it's made from trees and we can't find the roots of the trees, the tree didn't fall there, so it's been constructed. So it's not going to be a human adult, because why would they do that? Kids will do it, but they won't. And it's in remote areas. So something is making structures, and it's got to be something with hands and fingers.
Well, I've been out with the Sasquatch investigators, and now I can say when I'm out, as I said last week, I have not seen a Sasquatch, but I've seen evidence, and that's one of the telltale signs for me when I see those structures out there. And they're, well, I don't want to say they're obvious, but they're obviously not, not made by a bear or a human, and they're there. That absolutely, positively.
Exactly.
Yeah, Sasquatches, they do seem very human-like, right? Almost like, I guess from an evolutionary standpoint, if humans came from more of like monkey kind of, though, that ancestral line, it kind of feels like it was almost like an in-between, because there's a lot of fur and stuff, but they're also very human-like. Has anybody gone into like why Sasquatches are a thing, or how they evolved, or I guess like the history of them, or anything along those lines?
This is a good segue to talk about the PhD friend that you've met and the two books, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we talked about Dr. John Bindernagel on the part one, and I did mention DNA, that we had, when we sent in hair samples and actually tissue samples that came from Snell Grove Lodge that had blood on it, the samples always come back as human contaminated. And I thought this was odd, because we use forensic methods to collect evidence. We use tweezers, and we use brown paper bags for collecting the evidence. So there's no way that they could all be human contaminated. So that led me to believe that there's got to be they got to be related to us somehow, DNA-wise. I don't know how far back, 100,000 years, whatever. In 2013, Dr. Melba Ketchum in Texas did her DNA study, and she found that 50% of the DNA from the Sasquatch samples that were sent was human mitochondrial DNA. So that told us that a human female, by the way, the nuclear DNA was of unknown source, unknown origin, but the mitochondrial, being female, had to be related to a human female. So everyone was saying, oh, Sasquatch have 50% human DNA. And I thought this through, and it didn't make sense to me. And I thought, no, I think we have 50% Sasquatch DNA. I think Sasquatch's been around a lot longer than we have. And we have a lot of data to support that, but we're not ready to talk about it right now, because we're not finished.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of idea, you think, when you will be able to talk about the data at all?
By next year, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, not quick.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back for another show to be sure.
Yeah, like if you guys break some big stuff, we're going to bring you back in for sure.
But Ontario Sasquatch, not Sasquatch
Yes.
Ontario, which we talked about last week. But when people think they have a report, what should they do? We welcome all people to come to the website, Ontario's the Facebook page, Ontario Sasquatch. What should they do?
Well, you can chat to us on Facebook at Ontario Sasquatch. We have a group there of 1,300 members or so. If you want to send me an email or a message, you can do that. Our email address is onsasquatch@protonmail.com. And we respond to all reports.
Now, you were talking about, while we were off air, about you captured, there's something about eyes?
The eye shine.
The eye shine, that's what it was.
Oh, we go to this location. The landowners had activity for over 20 years. We've been going there for the last 2 or 3 years, and I was in contact with him for a couple of years before that. Excuse me. We were sitting there last year in the dark using a FLIR, and we were monitoring eye shine. And during that time, a juvenile, I had gone down to my truck to get a drink, and I left the cooler box on the tailgate. And I went back up, and the person that was using the FLIR said, the eye shine, the eyes followed you all the way down and all the way back up. And while he's saying this, a juvenile went right across his field of view. So we have a short video of this juvenile going down to check the truck and see what I left in the cooler for him. On our next trip there, I took a surveying tripod and we measured the eyes at 9'1", so we can add about 6 or 7 inches to that to the top of the head. We think this may have been the female. In the spring of the same year, the landowner had found a set of 20-inch prints in the snow. This was about April when the snow was just about gone. And he followed that for 100 yards or so, and he was joined by a set of 24-inch prints. So we made a note of all that. We think that was the male and the female. So using other stories, for instance, his son, a couple of years before, had been laying in bed, and he saw this huge creature with his hand on the roof, leaning under the eaves and looking through the window. So we measured the eaves at 9'4", and we've determined now that the female is probably around 9.5 feet tall with a 20-inch foot, and that the male is somewhere between 11 and 12 feet tall with a 24-inch foot. This is good data because us and other organizations are charting all this information and trying to determine if we can calculate accurately the height of these creatures. I call them creatures, they're actually hominids. They are definitely related to us. If we can determine the height of using the length of the feet. Our chart right now is based on human anatomy, which is not quite accurate because we know that the Sasquatch arms go down, or their hands go almost down to their knees, whereas that's not true for humans. So it's only a rough calculation using human anatomy. But when we can measure the footprints in the snow and then compare them to our visual reports, we can get more accurate data, and eventually we're going to be able to accurately calculate the size of a Sasquatch from a footprint, which is about as close as we're going to get to actually measuring them.
So if you take, for the people who are a little bit skeptical, right? If the footprint itself, how do we know that that's from, let's say, a creature like a Sasquatch versus something else? It could be something else, right? What makes that footprint so unique that you believe that it's from a Sasquatch?
I can't think of another creature that walks barefoot in the snow.
That's fair. Sure, yeah, that's good.
Not when it's minus 12.
Yeah. And I know last week, like in our part one, you were talking about how it was very flat, right? Then no arches on the foot.
They're
as well.
flat-footed, yeah.
Yeah.
Their ankle bone's actually further forward than the human one.
Interesting.
We know this. I will make a comment about the snow. We get a lot of reports of prints in the snow, and the Sasquatch prints are actually very much in line with each other. They're not one on the right and one on the left. They're in line. Well, it turns out the moose does the very same thing, and the moose will put its forehoof down, and then on the next step, the hind hoof comes in and slightly overlaps the print left by the forehoof. So now we've got a fairly large print, say 12 inches long, that's in line. So until you go really close, it looks like it could be a Sasquatch. We've had quite a few reports of that, and of course, when we go in and we look at the bottom, we can see that it's actually a moose hoof and not a Sasquatch print. So Sasquatch is fairly unique.
So whether it's Christine or Peter, tell us about sitting around the fire and calling them in, and just because that only comes with experience and knowledge and those kinds of things. Ben and I are not going to sit around the fire, and I don't think have that opportunity. We've got to learn how to do that.
I'll have to put my 2 cents in here. I don't believe in having any electronics. I think they are super sensitive to electronics, and I think I've been told that they see infrared. So if you've got cams out or whatever, but I believe that when we've been down to this location that Peter talks about, I think they're more used to us coming with those things. So maybe they're not hesitating so much. They're more curious of maybe what we're doing with this stuff. But if my interpretation of this is, if you go sit around a campfire, I think that you can do things like a native drumming, a little soft drumming or something. Most of the encounters that I've heard about through investigators that I know it's done without the electronics. And the other thing is, another thing that I really believe in is no animals, no dogs. First of all, there's been reports of people losing their dogs, and I do think that a dog, we've heard lots of reports that dogs will actually hesitate. They don't want to, but it's just taking a risk. But, we've had success with electronics, but it's definitely sitting around a campfire and just, I believe that you put out to the universe as well, we're not here to harm you. We would love to learn from you, and we mean no harm. And that should be the intention, because I believe they're sentient. I believe they are just as empath as we are, and that's the way to communicate and get some results.
Right. Peter?
They let their presence known to us. Year before last, 2 trees were pushed over about 2 o'clock in the morning, about 200 feet away from us. They're just letting us know they're there. The juveniles are the ones that come in closer, and there's a metal roof on the cabin that we're at, by the way. They'll throw pebbles onto the metal roof, or they'll throw them near us just to kind of taunt us. We leave Snickers bars out for them, and honeycombs and Reese's Pieces. They like peanut butter. They like chocolate. So, yes, the juveniles are always around to see if they can get some treats. And they let us know they're there with the pebbles.
Ben, you're going to be thinking about that the next time you're sitting around the fire, whether with me or not, but nonetheless. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, I had one. I'm just channeling the inner skeptic and trying to get what people are going to say, right? And one of the things that I was thinking about is, if they're so large, right, how are they so, and I know we kind of went into this a little bit in part 1, but why do people not see them? If they're so large and they're so big, how do they hide,
Have you ever seen a moose walking through the bush and how quiet it is? Because you can sit in a campground and a moose can actually walk by you. Think about the color of a moose. I know in Northern Ontario they've got a dark basic top and maybe lighter legs. And I sat beside a campground one time, and the moose was probably as far as that wall, and I couldn't get over how silent it was. And it was going through pine, so it's, and I was amazed. And then that's when I thought, like, yeah, you could be sitting around a campfire and they can be very close. And another thing I'm just going to mention, people talk about a bad odor. We don't always get a report of bad odor. So, it's not a telling tale, really. So just my comment on that.
Yeah, bears have bad odors, and we know
Yeah.
that to be sure. And Ben, we've got to get you outside a little more because this has been so fascinating. You'll have to come back to the show. But at the same time, I always say these are the kinds of things and stories we'd like to talk about in the Backroads Bill podcast because all these things occur out on the back roads.
Cougar are very shy. They can sense you long before you get anywhere near them. You never see a cougar. You might surprise them if they're busy eating a kill or something, and you come around a corner, you might see a cougar. But we have a lot of cougars. Very few people see them. Bears, you can't hear a bear at night. They're very quiet. So Sasquatch, being as intelligent as they are, if they don't want to be seen, their senses are way more keen than ours are. Actually, humans, with their 5 senses, are probably one of the very poor people with their senses in the animal kingdom. We know dogs and smell and ears and everything else. Everything senses us before we see them.
So that brings another question to me is, if they don't want to be seen, why do they choose times to show themselves? Do you have any theories on that?
Christine mentioned that she gives intention that we're not there. They can sense whether we have good intentions or bad intentions. They certainly don't appear to hunters, though bow hunters that are up in a tree camouflaged with scent spray and everything, they have seen them. But very few hunters on the ground with rifles have seen them. Do they deliberately appear? I don't think. I think it's more by surprise. They're crossing the road when a car comes around the corner or something. I don't think they appear willingly, put it that way.
Yeah, because when Christine, when you were telling your story, it almost sounded like it was a little bit more willingly. It was like it's saying hi to you kind of thing or showing you its presence. So, yeah.
I'm sure I looked very curious. The other thing is just for, intention. And just in case you didn't know, a horse can sense my heartbeat from 10 feet away. So, and that's, like what kind of abilities do they have to sense, are we nervous? Are we relaxed? Are we more, open to contact?
Yeah, I think there are beings that want to be around people that they sense that. And there's that, they don't want to be around people that are standoffish, so to speak. So I think that's all part of that connectivity that's out there.
At our one gifting spot that's been monitored now for almost 10 years, we leave them food. We kind of whisper as we're going in that we're here to just leave some food. We've had a lot of encounters that way. They've been seen by our monitor maybe 3-4 times. Mostly he just sees the back end of a leg going into the bush as they're ducking out of the way. And Christine had mentioned about animals that just disappear when we come along. Somebody mentioned the gorillas and stuff. They can just kind of meld back into the bush and you don't see them. But some of them, yeah, they want to communicate with us, like our group that likes chocolate bars. But generally, they don't have any time for humans.
Exactly.
I think they got more sense than we do.
Yeah. Well, I think my final, as we wrap up here, my final statement, Ben, is believe in the Backroads.
Yeah. Is there, while you're here and you have the platform, is there anything we didn't go over, anything that you want to say, want to put out into the world there?
I had an interesting encounter over 10 years ago now. We had talked about people holding back and not talking for years. I had a knock on my office door one morning, and it was the electrical manager. And he said, "Can I have a word with you?" And I said, "Yeah." So he came in and sat down. I thought, "Oh, what's going on here?" I was the general manager, and of course I was expecting some bad news. So he says, "I heard that you investigate Sasquatch." I said, yes. How'd you find that out? He said, one of the sales representatives, phoned you last week with a report of a sighting that he'd had at Packwash Provincial Park. He said, and he recognized your voice on the phone, and not your voice, your name. He said, and of course he called me, and here I am sitting talking to you. Well, I didn't want 120 construction workers knowing that the boss is interested in Sasquatch, so I kept quiet, and the electrical manager had kept quiet. And now we're face to face, kind of coming out of the closet, and for the next 5 years, him and I were the best bush buddies going after Sasquatch.
Well, that's uncanny. If it's the same Packwash Park up by Red Lake,
Yeah.
I'm going there in 2 weeks because it's the most northern provincial park that you can camp at. So now I think maybe it's my destiny that I'm going to go there and I'm going to be sitting around the campfire. Who knows what will happen? But as soon as you said that, I thought, I'm going to that park.
I'm going to give you the report because I involved the minister of the MNR in Ottawa because I traced that down, and I'll give you the full report.
Oh, please do.
After all my running around, I had a phone call from a retired guy that said that he had been the superintendent at that time. And this is back in 1987. So he told me this long story of he gave me names and everything else, and nothing to do with Sasquatch. And I said, "Okay, thank you very much," and I hung up the phone. And then I'm thinking to myself, 30 years ago, I can't remember who was in the same campground as me 30 years ago, but he had it all down pat. This was just a whitewash to dismiss me.
Well, I'm looking forward to that report, and I'll report back on going up there because I am going there. This is like, it's one of those dots that might have been connected, and just like you met Peter and your encounter, and being here in the studio, Ben, you need to go outside a bit more.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I think that finally Ontario and whatever is getting used to the idea that Sasquatch exists. But I'm telling you, if you go out west and you land in the airport on Vancouver Island, you can buy a Sasquatch doll. Because
really?
It's wide open in the communities. Wow. There's no hesitation, So, yeah, so let's get there.
Let's get there. And of course, as a little bit of a news tidbit, that the Canadian Ecology Centre, as we speak, is having a sculpture do a 8-foot Sasquatch just as part of this whole thing. And I've always been in tuned and excited about it. So, Ben, off we go to another Backroads adventure on the Backroads Bill podcast.
It'll be good. Thank you guys so much for joining us, Peter, for 2 weeks in a row.
Thanks for having us.
A big thank you to Peter and Christine for joining Bill and myself to share some of that. I know Bill said he's working on a story, and I'm super excited to see when they get the Sasquatch statue done at the Ecology Centre. I think it's going to be really cool. I think it's going to drive some tourism, and I think it's going to drive some attention. And I'm actually it's going to be really cool, man. If it's a really well done statue, which I'm sure it will, that's really good. And it's such a Bill thing too. And I know that the viewers who don't know Bill and who just see this through the podcast, if you get to know Bill on a more personal level, it's a very Bill thing to do, which is it's just great to see too. And by the way, the Ecology Centre is also coming up on its 30th anniversary, so that's congratulations to him as well. I know we dive into that a little bit. We're going to be diving into it, I should say, a little bit more in next week's episode as well. So if you want to check out more of the Backroads Bill podcast, you can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, the video version is on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and you can always go over to NorthBayEcho.ca, where new episodes drop every single Wednesday morning. And while you're over there on NorthBayEcho.ca, you can check out all of the other local North Bay podcasts the Echo Community Podcast Network offers, like To North Bay with Love, where myself and Lisa took a little journey yesterday up to the Canadian Forces Museum of Aerospace Defense up at the base in North Bay. It's a really cool place, very tactile. You can kind of go around and actually touch things. It's not all hidden behind glass. They have a cool little fuselage from one of their training planes that me and Lisa got to sit in, which was really neat. So we talked to Bethany and Maya there. It's a really interesting one to check out. It's already out. It came out yesterday, so you can check that one out on your favorite podcast players. And over on Echo Essentials, dropping tomorrow, Dave and Scott chatted with City Councillor Jamie Lowry about his impact so far on council. And they also asked him point blank why people just don't like him. So again, you can check that one out on either the North Bay Echo YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast player, with, of course, that one coming out tomorrow afternoon. And finally, check out the Echo Essentials newsletter. Great curated guide to everything you need to know about North Bay, the podcasts that we offer, news, events. It's sent to your inbox for free on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You can sign up at NorthBayEcho.ca. And that wraps things up for us. We will be back next Wednesday for another Backroads adventure.